how a child leaves the system and enters adult life and society is critically important to where they can eventually take their lives.
Welcome to the Healing Hearts podcast, where we explore the complex challenges of parenting and empower families to build resilience. Every episode covers true stories and shares expert advice and effective strategies to boost your family's well-being. The Healing Hearts podcast is brought to you by a team of students and parents. Here, you can gain a fresh perspective and a new voice with resources and support. Welcome to the Healing Hearts family.
Today, we're joined by Paul McBride, a passionate attorney and fierce advocate for justice, especially for kids and families who need it most. As a UF Law graduate and former prosecutor, Paul's drive comes from personal experience in Florida's child care welfare system. Now at GOLDLAW, he handles wrongful death and sexual assault cases and serves on the boards of AMI Kids and Speak Up for Kids. Paul, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Sophia. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, a little busy these days, but as always, but otherwise doing great. I'm glad to be here.
We're happy to have you. I wanted to start off by asking what inspired you to become an attorney?
Yeah, I think that's a great question for pretty much for any attorney, for anyone in general. For me personally, it's something I've come to talk about more and more. I had a difficult time talking about my childhood for many years. And then as I entered the field of law and actually became an attorney, I started talking about it more and more because I was handling criminal cases involving domestic violence and other things of that nature. But for me, it comes from child experiences. I have a unique background. My parents are both deaf, with an F, of course, not with a D, but I had that. And then my mother was gone by the time I believe I was about 18 months old or so. And eventually Florida law enforcement took me from my father, and I went through the Department of Children and Families for a short time before my grandmother eventually took me, and my sister for that matter. And so those things, being raised in a violent home for a period of time, and then seeing the opposite of that, right? Seeing my grandparents fight for me the way that my parents just simply didn't. And I was very fortunate to have them. So it's a combination of where I come from, but also of seeing what they were willing to do for me in terms of raising my sister and I and pushing us to do as much as we could to give back to others who had been through something similar. So that's really where it comes from, I would say, and where I landed. It's in part to honor what they did for us.
Yeah, that idea of giving back certainly makes sense with your now occupation as a lawyer. Can you explain how your experience has shaped your approach to representing vulnerable clients?
Sure. There are a lot of areas of law. You have corporate law, you have commercial law, things of that nature. You're representing companies or businesses or maybe even celebrities or what have you. But when you're representing vulnerable clients, you mentioned earlier that our law firm here, GOLDLAW, handles sex trafficking cases and things of that nature. You have to have the ability to be patient. You're dealing with people who are not just vulnerable, but are oftentimes broken to some degree. What they've gone through is horrific. I nearly went through it myself as a child, and I think I'm very fortunate I didn't, but was very close. And having the ability to be understanding, even when the person that you're representing really is just trying to make it through every day. It's a challenge. It is. There are going to be times that you're going to get calls, not during the business day. You're going to be talking to someone who is in crisis. And so having the background of having dealt with some very difficult things myself as a child has made it much easier to be able to handle that and be there for those clients, but also to keep in mind the perspective of just how important it is that you fight those battles for them, that you stand beside them, and that they know that you're there for them.
Yes. I am assuming here that the work that you do in talking about these types of conversations and situations can be a lot, not only for the clients, but also for yourself. So I'm wondering if you could share a defining moment in your legal career that maybe reaffirmed your passion for justice and that you knew you were always going to continue on this path.
There, there are many. I think, being that we're talking about trafficking specifically, that there was one for me. There was a case that we had a couple of years ago. I can't go into specifics too much, But there were a series of motions filed by the defense, which was a large multinational company who had allowed something that certainly was trafficking to occur. Again, I can't really go too deep into that given the circumstances. But that being said, I was tasked with responding to, I believe it was 8 motions that they had filed that would have made it very difficult for our client to win, to get her justice. And I remember just having these thoughts that I wish that I'd had the opportunity in hindsight to get justice myself when I was a child, and living with the fact that that's not going to happen, right? And unfortunately, many of our at-risk kids don't, if they don't get that opportunity for any number of reasons. For me, it was because I refused to come forward. And then I look back now, and sometimes I wish I had, but it didn't get in the way of me eventually working my way through it. But in that particular case, I remember being in my office when the order came back from the court. And so what will happen when you file motions, either the court will have a hearing on it, or, and depending on the court, will sometimes just issue a written ruling. And in this particular case, there were all these motions that had been filed. And I got the order back, and it explains the ruling in each motion. And then at the bottom, it'll say what it was the court grants or denies. And of course, I was excited to see the outcome. I wanted to read why, but I wanted to know first what the court had decided. And I went through it and skipped to the bottom of each portion. And in each and every single one, we won. And the feeling of that was really overwhelming in that moment, knowing that the justice that sometimes I wish I had, that maybe was denied to me, was something that I helped to get for someone else, was incredible. And I don't know that I needed it to be reaffirmed in what it was that I was doing, but if ever I did, or ever I will look back on that and just that, and how incredible that felt, knowing that I could do that for someone else.
Wow. Yeah, the legal system definitely, a lot of people have their own opinions on how it works to support or not support children or people that, have to work with it. And I was wondering how you think the legal system supports or fails children in need and how they allow laws or motions to be decided, how it works.
Yeah, there are a lot of very fair criticisms, I think, of the system. I think a lot of the legal system, I think a lot of that has to do with resources, or there not being enough resources. I also think that it's important to keep in mind that you have, we say, competing interests. So you have certain rights that everyone has. You can't, of course, just make an accusation without it being proven, or things of that nature. And it does make it challenging. When I was handling domestic violence cases, and I was in a position as a state attorney where I have to balance what the community feels is fair against what the victim thinks is fair, against what is just in terms of the defendant, who I may very well believe is very guilty or may have done something that was really awful, but they still have certain rights, and I'm ethically bound to respect that. So balancing all those things can be a challenge. Now, here, our job, of course, is to get ethically the best outcome for our client that we can, which is very different. But keeping in mind that there are all these kind of competing interests, and as challenging as it is, and as difficult as it is sometimes to accept the outcomes, our system is designed or built to keep that in mind. But I really think it's more a matter of resources more than it is anything, and awareness of some of the issues that we have when we talk about trafficking. Again, I keep talking about it, but it is such a huge problem. And it really is specifically in Florida, in the state of Florida, and in South Florida. And there's so many people who don't really understand that it's even taking place, let alone understand the resources that are necessary to combat it. So for me, I would say there are those competing interests. There are a lack of resources, a lack of understanding about what so many of our kids are going through. I also think that we're now in an age where, of course, social media is this huge specter over our kids, because they have the ability to see what other people have that maybe they don't. And there's an old saying that I've always loved, which is comparison is the thief of joy, right? So there's a lot of information out there, and I think that there's some misunderstandings as to what the system is capable of doing, and a lot of that has to go to resources, which unfortunately here in Florida is they're just not there. And I think if that were corrected, there would probably be a big shift in terms of taking care of our kids that are in crisis.
You talk about resources and their lack of availability in Florida. That sort of answers my next question, but do you think that is one of the biggest legal challenges that are facing children today, just that variation of resources state to state?
Right, I think so. I can't really speak to to other states and their legal systems, or right for maybe later down the road, because I'm working on getting my bar admission in New York and Florida right now. But as for Florida, it certainly is a challenge, and I say that with some experience, although now we're talking many years later. But having dealt with the court system as a child, and having gone through the Department of Children and Families for a time, and seeing the caseworkers and social workers and so forth, the challenges that they're facing. If you talk to a DCF attorney, because they're literal attorneys that handle cases for the Department of Children and Families, they're very strapped in terms of their time, in terms of their workload, and the work that they're doing is so incredibly important. But it's an uphill battle. When I was a state attorney, there were times when I was handling several hundred cases at a time. That's No one can do that. It's not possible to be able to do that and give the attention that is really needed. Now take that and shift that to where you're talking about children in crisis, and you have, and I'm not saying they have hundreds, I don't know how many, I just know that they have far too many for each of them. But where each of those cases is extremely sensitive and very, as attorneys, it's like we have however many cases we have. But if you're the client or you're the child that's involved in that case, that's your only case and it is your life. And whether or not the proper amount of attention and resources are being focused on that can mean the world to that particular child and to the outcomes that they have access to, where they can go with their lives. And that transition from childhood to adulthood is so critically important. Speak Up for Kids, this has become something that is a focal point for our organization, because how a child leaves the system and enters adult life and society is critically important to where they can eventually take their lives. But I'm sorry, I'm a little passionate about all this stuff, so I'm rambling a bit. But yeah, we certainly have a lack of resources, I would say, here in Florida. I can't speak to the other states, but it's something that needs to be addressed, and I'm skeptical that it will, unfortunately, which is why it's so important that private actors, that people and charities and so forth do everything that they can, because the government, it doesn't have those kinds of resources, unfortunately. Private people and charities have to step in and substitute for it.
Yeah, you touch on it, you talk about it beautifully, and I think it makes a lot of sense. With Speak Up for Kids, we do a lot of advocacy work, but I was wondering, why is advocacy crucial for children in the foster care system or juvenile system, and what role do attorneys play in advocating versus private actors?
All right, I love this topic. The reason why is, and it's inherent in Speak Up for Kids' name, right? The reason why is because they generally cannot, of course, speak for themselves, and especially not in a legal setting. Part of the reason why I became an attorney was because I can think back on being in a courtroom and not understanding what was going on around me when I was 6 years old, or I believe somewhere around there. In fact, it's incredible. This was not by design at all, but these are actually the orders that were entered when I was a kid that took me from my father and that gave me to my grandmother. I had kept the original copies that she kept for me, and I can't even remember why I brought them in, frankly, but they've been there forever. And it's a neat reminder. But the fact of the matter is that our kids can't speak for themselves, and if there isn't someone who can, they will go without a voice, and decisions will be made about them and their futures and their very lives that they had no input in or no ability to voice or to give voice to. And so it's critically important that there are people who do that. As attorneys, it's critically important because the law is a language, and in a sense, that's how I think of it, right? And if you can't speak that language, then you're going to be lost. Again, there are going to be decisions made about you that you really didn't have input in. So for us who are very fortunate to have gotten to a point where we made it through all those years of education and the bar exam and all of that, to take some time to remember that there are people that don't have the ability to do that for themselves and do it for them, whether that be in the actual work that you do, what you do for a living, or in your what free time you do have, taking some of that time and the knowledge that you have to pay it forward for other people who don't have it. So there are a ton of organizations that attorneys can get involved in, both as attorneys, legal organizations. The Legal Aid Society in Palm Beach County is incredible. The work they do is fantastic. They have some really dedicated people there. Or if it's an organization like Speak Up for Kids or any number of others that really want to have lawyers there because they can help out in issues that are very unique. And again, it's like a different language, right? If I talk to an engineer, I don't know what they're talking about, or a doctor or what have you, right? But having someone there who can explain those things and help other people who don't have the ability to speak to it is incredibly important.
That makes a lot of sense. I've definitely never thought of it that way as law being another language, but when you do, it is something that some have to learn and some maybe don't have the ability to learn. And so being able to have that knowledge and provide resources for other people is really amazing.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of this episode of Healing Hearts. Be sure to tune in next time. If this episode has been valuable to you, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who might benefit. Also, stay connected on social media and visit our website through the links in the description. Remember, a heart like a garden needs care to flourish. You're listening to Healing Hearts. We'll see you next time for part 2.
You're going to be, whether you like it or not, a resource for your children forever. But making those decisions in conjunction with someone who has the knowledge of the law is critically important.
Welcome to the Healing Hearts podcast, where we explore the complex challenges of parenting and empower families to build resilience. Every episode covers true stories and shares expert advice and effective strategies to boost your family's well-being. This is the second part of a 2-part series, so make sure you listen to part 1 if you haven't already. The Healing Hearts podcast is brought to you by a team of students and parents. Here, you can get a fresh perspective and a new voice with resources and support. Welcome to the Healing Hearts family.
You talk about other organizations as well that are doing amazing work, and I was wondering how you'd be able to characterize GOLDLAW and how they stand out when it comes to protecting families and children.
All right. Not doing this because I'm looking for Craig to be happy with what I'm saying about him, but the owner of our law firm, Craig Goldenfarb, he specifically encourages the attorneys to get involved in charity. Ironically, so shortly I came here it was May 2nd of 2022, and Craig set out to mentor me in a couple of different ways. But we had a meeting at some point where he said, hey, the next time that we talk, have a few charities in mind and we'll talk about them. And because I was new to the area, I'm not from Palm Beach County. I lived in Orlando for some time before. And Craig's been here for many years, of course. So he basically said, bring me a list with a few organizations that you're interested in helping out with. And I said, we can talk about it right now because I have 5 that I'm already looking at. So we did. And Speak Up for Kids was the one that I ended up choosing. There's that. We actively encourage it. Craig is involved in I couldn't begin to tell you how many organizations, frankly. He's also created scholarships and other things of that nature. He now also works with Hokie and Belglades high schools and does things with them. I'm trying to think of, the list is just endless. Our attorneys are encouraged to get involved in different bar associations and things like that. So it's constant, but it's also in the work that we do. And what I mean by that is that our firm has basically just made the conscious decision that we're going to handle tough cases. We're going to handle cases that sometimes may not be super profitable, but chasing down the correct result in those cases is what's best for this community. It's what's best for the vulnerable people in our community and in our state, and also utilizing all that to pursue different changes in the law that are designed to protect victims of any number of things of crime. Not just trafficking, but of shootings that occur in places that are dangerous. They're known to be dangerous by the owners, and they just don't do anything about it, oftentimes, frankly, out of greed. So different things of that sort. It's not only do we here actively encourage our attorneys and our staff, not just our attorneys, but everyone in the building to pay it forward, we also pursue it in the work that we do. We pursue it in the changes in the law that we hope to see out there that can really make a difference for the people across our state.
Yeah, You talk about the idea of the law and how we can help
Mhm.
shift it and change it in order to make it better for the citizens of the state. And I'm wondering if with that comes any misconceptions about personal injury law, and could you maybe share some of those and how it is, in your view, different?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there there are there are a ton of them. We often hear the phrase ambulance chaser, for example, things like that. Like we're trying to find someone that's hurt so that we can then go after. And there's so many things about the way that our practice is designed that it, it's done so in a way that allows people who don't have the resources to get an attorney so that they can come to us. For example, if you're very wealthy, there's a significant chance that your family already has an attorney or knows an attorney. And so you're not going to pick up the phone and call our firm because you already know someone who is a friend, is a family member, or some people, to me has always been a bizarre thought, but some people have just an attorney who represents their family for whatever they need. To me, that's unthinkable. but but we don't charge clients anything unless they get something from their case. We work on a what's called contingency, which means that you pay us nothing unless you actually get something from your case. So there's that part of it. It's we're literally designed to help people who would not be able to get help otherwise. So that part of it. Other misconceptions about things that we do. Oh, geez, the list goes on. When we're talking about kids in particular, there are some challenges. We oftentimes have, or not, I shouldn't say oftentimes, thankfully, but it certainly does happen. Sometimes we represent children who have lost a parent. The challenges of doing that are often not really seen. Having a child who has lost lost a parent as a client means that you have to keep again in mind what they have gone through. You have to keep in mind that child's future. Okay, that is critically important, regardless of the outcome of the case. That child has to live with the outcome and bearing in mind the weight of that, but also making the best decision, not taking on challenges that maybe could risk that child's future. So these are some of the things that we have to weigh. But you don't hear about those things, of course. I think a lot of people have some feelings about attorneys or about lawyers as a general matter. I totally understand that. Everybody's had some bad experience because the attorney on the other side was trying to represent their client. And that's their only concern. And understanding that that's the oath that we take, right? It's you have to detach yourself from certain things because you're supposed to be the voice for that person. And there are so many, and just rambling here, but there are so many, and I think that for a lot, and maybe this is true of some, I suppose that there's this idea that it's about the money, it's about the profit. But again, here at GOLDLAW, we specifically take on difficult cases that we feel out of principle need to be pursued. And I think that misconception doesn't apply here. And I'm really grateful I ended up here, honestly. Just sheer luck, one in a million. But again, we could go on forever about misconceptions about the legal field. There are so many, and some of them are fair, meaning that they come from a place of where there was something that really is well founded behind it. But it's so important to keep in mind that those things are not true of everyone. They're true of a certain experience, and keeping in mind that you don't want that to paint how you view everyone, of course.
Thank you for adding some background and context to some of these misconceptions that our audience or just the public might hear. Shifting over to parents and how they can help support their children, I'm wondering how you can speak to how parents and guardians can ensure their children's legal rights are protected.
Again, so I mentioned like the Legal Aid Society earlier. Knowing that there are resources, knowing that you can find the information out there to find someone who is a professional that can help. I think parents. I'm a big advocate personally for parents' rights with their kids and having the ability to make those decisions as a parent who knows your child. You know your child better than anyone. That being said, and I'm not a parent, so I should probably come out and say that first. I'm not, but understanding that there are situations where you know your child best, but you really need to talk to someone who is an expert in their field and have a conversation where you are making decisions that are informed. And that professional, if they're doing what they should, and talk to more than one, right? Talk to more than one attorney, but it's the same as a doctor, right? Get a second opinion, please. I would never advocate for anything other than that, but understanding that your knowledge of your children and how much you care about them and their futures and all that need to go into those decisions. But ultimately, if you've made a good choice, that lawyer is going to be making their decisions on the law guided by your knowledge of your children or your child. But I recognize that can be difficult, right? Because there's a certain amount of trust that you're putting in this person to make the the best decisions, to do the best work, to give you the correct advice. And that can be challenging, I'm sure, an emotionally charged decision. But there are resources out there. I mentioned that they're limited, of course, but a lot of that was in reference to, for example, kids who are in the foster care system or in DCF, right? Parents are in a bit of a different position because at least that child has the most important resource of all, which is their parent. And you're going to be, whether you like it or not, a resource for your children forever. But making those decisions in conjunction with someone who has the knowledge of the law is critically important.
And furthering this conversation, what advice would you give to parents navigating a legal battle with their child?
So I guess it depends on what kind of legal battle we're talking about, right? If you're I can only speak to some things broadly, right? So, for example, when you're talking about like a divorce or something like that, I think the advice I would give is to just keep your children in mind in terms of the decisions that you're making with the person who I guess was your spouse, right? Understanding that while it's a very difficult emotional situation for the parents, for the kids, they're just caught up in it and lost and don't understand what's going on a lot of the time. And so I would say when you're navigating legal battle as parents, and that's just one scenario, there are so many areas of law and things like that. It's difficult to really speak to all of them in a limited amount of time. But I would say just keeping your children's interests front and center and making decisions based on what's going to be best for them because they are vulnerable and they don't have, again, the ability to voice, or maybe they do have the ability to voice their concerns, but that doesn't mean they're going to. Just because they can doesn't mean they will. Some kids will, for sure, but many are not going to do that. And they're not going to understand the consequences at the time anyway. Just always keeping their interests front and center, I think, is probably the best advice that parents can have.
Yeah. And shifting towards talking about advocacy groups again, how can legal professionals and businesses better support these advocacy groups, Speak Up for Kids? And I know you mentioned legal aid and stuff like this.
Yeah, okay. First off, just communicating with them, just reach out, just Google, literally, right? You can find so many organizations, they're all looking for help in some manner or another, whether that be, like I mentioned earlier, resources. But honestly, I think probably the biggest asset that can be provided by anyone, but the legal professionals certainly as well, is just your time and your caring about the cause. And there are tons of great ones. It doesn't just have to be what some of the things we're talking about today, but the value of your time is immense. The value of giving a voice to that cause. So talking about it with other people and telling them what this organization is doing and just being an advocate, not only when you're with members of the organization, when you're at an event or in your work, but really taking it to heart. And I think honestly in doing that, find one that you really connect with, right? Speak Up for Kids for me was an easy choice because again, I needed someone to do that for me. And thankfully at some point I had my grandmother who was just like a bulldog, right? But most kids don't, and most vulnerable kids don't, I should say. So it was easy for me. It was an easy fit. Finding an organization that's really near and dear to your heart in terms of what they're trying to do is the best way to ensure that you're going to go out there and talk about what it is that they do, that you're going to want to dedicate your time, and that it'll become really an integral part of your life, which I think is critical.
Yeah. And I have a question that might be in the back of some listeners' mind. How or what should young professionals interested in law and advocacy maybe know before entering the field? What advice do you have for them?
Other than be prepared to work a lot, it it goes off of what I mentioned. I hear a lot of people talk about, or just a moment ago, I hear a lot of people talk about following your passion, and I don't disagree with it, but I think there needs to be, how do I put this? I think it's important to connect your passion with what you are good at. Everyone's good at something. Everyone's good at something. Everyone's bad at some things. There's plenty of things I'm not great at, but connecting what you're passionate about with what you have some natural ability at doing, right? If those things connect, you're going to look around, as I do sometimes. Probably every several months, I take a moment, if I have it, and think about how far I've come and all the people that I can thank for how I got here, and just honestly soak it in for just a couple moments that it's unbelievable to me that I'm even here, that I'm so lucky. And I think about so many of the people that I know who didn't make it, right? But because I'm passionate about the things that I do or the work that I do, and it intersected with some things that I have some ability at, it allowed me to really do a lot of great work for people who need me very much. I'd say it's recognizing where those two things meet, right? What you're passionate about and what you have some ability to. And I'm not, look, it took a lot of work, right? I'm not by no means by saying, oh, I'm just a natural. No, it took a lot of work, but recognizing that when those two things intersect, you're going to be able to do some really incredible things, and hopefully for a great cause.
Yeah, thank you. My last question, how can everyday people get involved in making a difference for at-risk or vulnerable children?
I'm a big advocate, especially for, not that there aren't some great national organizations or international organizations, but I personally am a big advocate for more local organizations. Our firm really pushes that as well because we are kind of a community firm or a community business, if you will. But finding an organization that's close to your community, you're going to have much more ability to make an impact, but you're also going to be able to see the effects of what you're doing around you and on the people that live among your family or among your network. So I would say that the best way to give back is find something that is going to be not just close to your heart, but close to your home as well. Being able to give back to your community in a way that you can actually see it, feel it, I think will make anyone feel like what they're doing is extremely rewarding and impactful. So that's how I would, or how I tend to approach it personally. And I'm not saying it's the right way, it's just my way. And it's never led me astray. So that'd be my recommendation, is to find something that you can give back to locally, and you'll feel the reward of that very directly in such a way that will stick with you for a long time.
Making a difference close to your heart and close to your home is a great way to end this episode. Paul, thank you so much for being here today and for showing up every day to fight for the vulnerable. Your voice makes a difference both in and out of the courtroom, as seen here today. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Stay connected, continue the conversation, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope this episode was as valuable to you as you are to us. If it was, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who might benefit. It helps us reach more hearts. Stay connected with us on social media and visit our website through the links in the description. Remember, a heart like a garden needs care to flourish. You're listening to Healing Hearts. Until next time.